All right, welcome to the Young Turks. We're here at Politicon, and we're going to do a fun interview for you guys. No, not Ann Coulter, not yet.
Often confused, though.
Right. Bill Burton, former Deputy White House Press Secretary for the Obama administration, now Managing Director at SKDK, and just done a lot of different roles in Washington, D.C., worked for Senator Tom Harkin, Richard Gephardt, among many others.
Yeah.
So welcome back to the Young Turks.
Thank you.
Last time we talked on air was probably the '08 convention, right?
I think that's right. That's right. I've got a photo of it on my Facebook page.
And I don't remember if that interview was slightly contentious, but it probably was, because almost all my interviews are. But let's do it again.
Why not? It's been long enough that I forgot, so here I am.
Okay, good. Okay, so obviously you had a big role in the Obama administration. President Obama is nearing the end of his second term. You're not there anymore, but I take it you're a fan.
I am.
Okay.
I am.
So I want to dive into that. Let me start with a super broad question, then we'll narrow in.
Okay.
How do you think he's done so far?
I think he's done great. I spent the morning today looking at some of the old videos and speeches from the 2008 campaign, just to get a sense of, just to get my head right coming in for this interview and some of the other things at Politicon. And looking at some of the things that he talked about back on that campaign, he's really delivered. Whether it was on healthcare, whether it was ending the war in Iraq and refocusing our energies in Afghanistan, he did the things that he said he was going to do, and he's done it in a way where he's tried to be as collaborative as possible. He hasn't had a lot of folks on the other side who've been willing to play along. And I think early on in the administration, he learned some lessons about the fact that the Republicans just weren't going to come to play at all. Like, the economy was collapsing. We're trying to get the stimulus bill through. Not one Republican would show up to participate. And as a result, he changed some of his strategies. He worked hard to get a lot of stuff done, and now he's doing everything he can through executive action and going straight to the American people.
Okay, so all right, great. We're off to the races because there's a bunch I disagree in there.
Okay, perfect.
Now, a bunch I agree to. Don't
Okay.
get me wrong. Let's start nice and easy before we get to the bigger problems. Iraq and Afghanistan. Glenn Greenwald recently wrote, the guy who claims to have ended 2 wars still has troops and is doing bombings at least. I mean, I know that it's not ground troops. They don't have boots on. They have flip-flops or something. But he's still doing bombings in Iraq and Afghanistan. In fact, we I hope accidentally, just bombed a hospital in Afghanistan. And killing 22 people, including 10 doctors.
That's horrible.
So how did we end the wars if we're still doing bombings there?
There's a lot of places where there aren't wars happening per se, but the military is taking action to protect our interests and protect local civilians and to try to make the world a safer place. And I don't think anybody would say that things are going perfectly in Iraq or Afghanistan or in a lot of places in the world, right?
Yes.
But I think the president is doing what he can to keep those regions stable and to stop the spread of ISIL and other extremist factions on the ground.
All right, so let's leave Iraq out of it. I mean, I can go all day on he actually did want to stay longer in Iraq, but the Iraqi government didn't agree. You know that. But and then there's a good argument to be made that he had to come back in because of ISIL. I'm not sure I agree with that argument, but it's a solid argument to be had there. But in Afghanistan, my God, what are we still doing there, Bill? What are we still doing there? I mean, it's longer than Vietnam now. It's 3 years longer than the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. I changed my mind on the Afghanistan war. I was in favor of going in the first place. After Matthew Ho at the State Department resigned and said, he went and asked all the people in the valleys, why are you fighting us? And they said, because you're in my valley. They don't even know what America is. They don't know what Afghanistan is. If you ask them to find Afghanistan on a map, they don't know what the thing called Afghanistan is. So why are we still in their valleys?
I'm not privy to the same information that I used to be privy to, but I can say that the president's main goal in Afghanistan and any place where there are American troops is to protect American interests and to try to stop the spread of extremism. And to the extent that we can do that in Afghanistan, the president ought to be doing that. I don't think that pulling out means that the extremism stops. It means, we just completely give up. And the president's calculation is that that's not the right move at this point.
Yeah, it's not giving up to say us continuing to do bombings in a country is counterproductive. It's not helping. It's not making Afghanistan any less extreme. Also, an article last week about how our troops have to hold their nose while our Afghan allies rape young boys on our military bases.
That story was horrible. That story was horrible. No, it's absolutely terrible, and nothing that the United States should ever condone. And whenever our troops or our military is out there doing anything at all, it's in our name, right? That's something that's happening in my name. And of course, that should not be happening. And I know that there's a review to see exactly what went down, and the appropriate people are going to be punished. But no, that's a terrible thing, and absolutely should not have to be happening.
So let me get to slightly broader issues. I'll start on this issue. It appears to me that President Obama does generally want to get out of Afghanistan. I think the green walls of the world might disagree with me on that a little bit. I think that they think he's a little bit more right-wing or pro-establishment than even I do. And I think he's he's definitely establishment. I think he's far more right-wing than left-wing. But I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. The
president?
Yeah, I really do.
More right-wing than left-wing?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we'll get to that in a second.
Okay, that's weird.
Okay, we'll find out. We'll find out if it's weird. But I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that he actually wants to leave Afghanistan. But the Pentagon doesn't want to leave Afghanistan. Defense contractors never, ever, ever, ever want to leave Afghanistan or any other country. And if I'm being generous to the president, he keeps getting bullied by them. What are we, 6, 7 years in now? When is he going to say, hey, I don't know if you guys know this, I'm the commander-in-chief. So I remember one time in Afghanistan, he asked for, right in the beginning, hey, I want to plan on getting all the troops out, putting 30,000 in, and putting more in, roughly, right? And they came back with only 2 plans, and one that didn't include getting the troops out. Right then I would ask, okay, who's the guy right underneath you? Give me his name, because he's going to be at the next meeting if you don't immediately give me a plan for getting all the troops out. Why is he letting the Pentagon bully him?
Well, the president, first of all, has not been afraid to fire generals. When necessary, he's done it. And secondly,
when it tweaked his political interests in the McChrystal case.
Not just that, there's other generals that have gone away. Second, I would say that the president is very much committed to civilian control of the military and very much directs what they do and how they do it. And I don't think that he's being led around by the nose by military contractors or the Pentagon or anything. I think that he is leading the way. And when it makes sense to have Americans fighting to protect our interests, that's what he's doing. He takes very seriously that job, and he's not keeping Americans in harm's way because of a military contractor. Like, that's crazy. Like, he's not doing that. He's keeping American troops over there because he thinks that that's the right thing to do.
Bill, don't get me wrong. I don't think that they're secret meetings and they're like, okay, now Barack, you're going to do what we tell you to do, right? And he's like, okay, sorry, Mr. Northrop Grumman, right? But there is a system.
Secret meetings do happen with Michelle Obama.
Okay. Oh, is that right? Is that how it goes? Okay. So no, but it's a system. So it has built incentives and disincentives. And so, for example, you ran Barack Obama's super PAC in the last election, right? So I actually didn't mind that. And I know your quote about, hey, we're not going to unilaterally disarm. And I agree with that, okay? But then I would have wanted you to, once you use the super PAC to win, to come and actually trying to clean up politics. There are all those placards with change on them and get money out of politics. And that would have affected things like the relative strength of the military contractors with local congressmen, et cetera, that builds up to pressure to the president, right? That's how the system actually works. But in my estimation, the president has done almost nothing about that.
Well, a couple things. First of all, on priorities, the super PAC that I ran to help the president get reelected, that we raised and spent about $90 million to help the president make it back to the Oval Office for the second term. And if you look at the people who donated money to my super PAC, they cut checks anywhere from $1,000 up to $3, $4, $5 million. Not one of them became an ambassador. Not one of them got a special appointment in the White House. It wasn't like the influence of their money had a huge influence on the Obama administration. But second, or third, I did join the fight. I worked with Larry Lessig on campaign finance reform in the last cycle, and I actually just tweeted about Larry Lessig this morning because I think that what he's doing is an important thing, and we do have to get money out of politics. Did you see the report in the New York Times today? 158 families have given half of the money to presidential campaigns. It's a disaster.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to quote to you, actually.
Yeah, no, they had that awesome graphic too, the monopoly money or the monopoly pieces. But no, it is a massive problem. I absolutely believe that, and I think that it stands in the way of meaningful progress on a number of issues, particularly on global climate change.
So, Bill, if you're pushing the idea of a lesser campaign or at least supportive of it in some way, well, that's a great sign, and I absolutely believe you about your genuine support for it. But the Obama administration has done almost nothing, and obviously that's what matters, right? Your opinion matters, my opinion matters, but it matters a lot less than what the Obama administration has done.
I wouldn't say that he's done nothing. He's done a lot in terms of transparency, in terms of making public his bundlers, which is something that everybody does now, making public the donations even under $200, making public all the people who come into the White House. Like, all of those things matter.
You know they take meetings at the Starbucks at the corner because of that.
It's a Caribou Coffee. And
That's right. No, you're literally right. It is a Caribou
I know.
Coffee.
I work there. It's right across the street.
Right.
But, at the end of the day, we do need massive reform. And you're right. It is. If the president were sitting in this chair right now, he would say that that is probably one of the biggest things that he's left on the table in this administration.
So why? Why did he leave it on the table?
Well, when you're governing, you've got to make some choices. And the president chose to get health care through. He chose to end the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. He chose the auto bailout, the fiscal bailout, all the different things that he did. And it's not that he doesn't have a will to do campaign finance reform, but I can tell you that will does not exist in Congress.
So now, Bill, I would argue that campaign finance reform, getting money out of politics, free and fair elections, is overwhelmingly the top priority. And the reason I'd make that argument is because it's not a pet issue. It's not an issue that stands alone. Mm-hmm. It affects every other issue. Now, you would have had a much easier path to do financial reform, which I think was weak sauce at best, and then got watered down, right? And you talk about Republicans blocking President Obama. That's absolutely true. There's no question that that's happening. But all of those things, for example, federal background checks. 93% of Americans agreed with President Obama's proposal, mm-hmm. and he couldn't get it done. Now, why is that? Because we lost our democracy because the politicians don't care about what the American people think. They care about what their donors think. So then it has to be at a bare minimum a massive mistake not to focus on that first, because it affects every other issue.
Well, look, it's frustrating to me as well that it can't get done. And the problem isn't, frankly, it's not just Republicans, it's Democrats too in Congress who don't have the will to do anything on campaign finance reform. And part of the reason that there's no will is that nobody votes on this issue, or like such a small fraction of people actually vote on this. And for that reason, people don't focus on it. And people don't make it the center of their congressional campaigns. Larry Lessig, what he did in 2014 was he tried to make campaign finance reform a central issue in a handful of races around the country. Spent millions of dollars doing it, and he showed just how difficult it is to have an impact on elections, making that a central issue. My personal view, and this might be depressing, is that the only path to real fundamental campaign finance reform is electing a Republican president and having a Republican Congress. And the reason for that...
Interesting.
Yeah, the reason for that is, had Mitt Romney won this last time, people like Sheldon Adelson and the Koch brothers would have spent like upwards of $1 billion, just them, to elect Mitt Romney president. And so everything that they did or wanted, like the Justice Department investigation into Sheldon Adelson and what was going on with his foreign corrupt practices, alleged, is that
okay.
Apparently he has
They're
lawyers.
doing the investigation.
Yeah. Anything that would have happened there would have seemed shady because he had given so much money. So no matter what the outcome, the American people, the press, and the American people would have been like, well, how did all that money have an impact? And without that sort of thing, it's hard to actually make change happen. Like the last real fundamental campaign finance reform before McCain-Feingold, to the extent that that was fundamental reform, was after Watergate, right? It was Watergate that pushed it through. And I think that the only thing that's going to push it through the next time around is the scandals that will come with the next Republican administration.
So let me touch on that one last moment, then I want to move on to other issues. So look, I don't agree with that only because I don't think the press will focus on getting money out of politics under any circumstances. Uh-huh. So Bloomberg just had a poll, 78% of Americans want to get money out of politics, including 80% of Republicans, mm-hmm. right? And none of the nightly news covered it. None of the Sunday talk shows covered it. They're always saying, oh, we want things that Americans agree on. Well, 83% of Democrats and 80% of Republicans agree. It's almost the only issue in the country where they agree this much. But then, and they'll almost always rank it in the top two of issues they care most about. Mm-hmm. Jobs and the corruption in government, right? And so, but then the press will ignore it. Why? Because the super PACs turn around and spend billions of dollars in television. So it's not like there's no smoke-filled rooms, but it's not like the top-line TV executives don't notice the several $billion that go into their pockets from political ads.
No, I think that that's absolutely right. That's actually part of the problem, right? It's like Bob Schaefer can go on TV and bemoan campaign finance reform, till the cows come home. But the person writing his paycheck is the Koch brothers, right? It's Sheldon Adelson. It's all the people who are spending money at CBS to keep him on the air and pay for his expense account. So it's not going to change until I think that there has to be some kind of scandal. There has to be something that people focus on to make the change happen, because it's the will isn't there. I know that 80, 90% of people agree that there ought to be campaign finance reform, but you know what? Over 90% of Americans agree that there should be background checks. Americans are getting slaughtered every day in this country. Little kids got slaughtered, and even that wasn't enough to push gun reform in Congress, right? So on campaign finance reform, something that people agree on, where there isn't the same sort of focus on it and there isn't the same sort of emotional connection, doesn't have a chance if you can't even move gun control in Washington.
So again, last thing on it, it doesn't stand a chance in Congress. Congress, the virus has taken over the body politic. It's completely corrupt, not because they're bad people. I don't. Even the Republican politicians, maybe a couple of exceptions like Ted Cruz, generally not necessarily bad human beings, right? It's just that they got elected through bribery, legalized bribery, so they do the bidding of the people who bribe them. And that's true for a lot of Democrats as well. So, but people do care, and there is a lot you can do about it, not through Congress. Look, we're going to get an amendment passed on this. We are. And so
I would love that, but I don't think we will.
Okay.
Without some enormous external event.
No.
I don't think we will.
Okay, so I'm raising an army, and we're going to do it. You had a super PAC. I have a super PAC. It's called Wolf PAC. And we're going to push for the 28th Amendment. We're doing it now. We already have 4 states that have said we want a convention to go around Washington to get money out of politics.
It's great.
Okay.
The other way to do it is to go through local municipalities, right? Like Tallahassee has great local rules. Minnesota has really good rules. And if you go not just state by state, but also locality by locality, I think there's a way to get some real reforms.
But we want national reform. We want an amendment. The only way you get that is a convention through the states.
I'm all for it.
All right, excellent. So wolf-pac.com, everybody. Now, on to the issue that you mentioned in the beginning about President Obama's relationship with the Republicans. The Washington pundits in their general, I want to say idiocy, but I want to be polite. Okay, anyway, we told them, you got to go play golf, you got to eat tea and crumpets with the Republicans, you have to treat them nice. And unfortunately, it seems like the president listened to them for a painful number of years. I would argue at least 6 years. I agree with you now. He's finally like, oh, right. They're never going to agree with me. I got it, right? But why did it take so long to realize the actual dynamics in Washington, which is you're not going to convince those guys either through debate or polite conversation or golf. They're going to do whatever their donors tell them to do. Why did it take so long to realize that they would be obstinate forever?
Well, here's what I'd say to that. First of all, I think that the problem's gotten worse over the course of the 7 years that the president's been in office. So I think that the president has responded to the fact that it got worse. I think the president did learn a lot through the very first thing that he got through Congress, which was the stimulus, which was that Republicans were not going to come to play, regardless of the national crisis that we were in. But the third thing that I'd say, and this is why it's relevant that I watched some of those old speeches today. My view is that one of the best speeches the president ever gave, race speech aside, because that sort of stands on its own in this whole other place, is his concession speech in New Hampshire the night he lost to Hillary Clinton. And when you listen to that speech, the president talks about a new way of governing. He's got this commitment to working with everybody who wants to work together to get something done, right? And when he talks about he has this great line in there where he says, and this isn't in the Yes We Can video, this is just in the speech, where he says, all the people who are running for president share the same goals that I have. They want to make America stronger. They want American families to do better. They want American kids to have a better education. We all just disagree on how you do it. I think that we're all patriots in this, but we ought to all work together. Once there's elections, they have consequences. Let's work together to get things done. The president got to Washington, and Republicans actually did not share a commitment to working to make things better. What they wanted to do was just stop every single thing that President Obama was doing. And so I think that once that realization settled in those first couple of months, the president adjusted his strategies to make things happen. But the last thing that I'll say is, it's not like he didn't do anything. Mm-hmm. I think people will look back at this presidency and talk about the massive changes that the president brought to pass. And I think history will judge whether or not they were effective enough. But I tell you what, there's millions of Americans who have health insurance who didn't have health insurance before. Millions of Americans who have jobs that didn't have jobs before. And the economy is getting better, not for everybody, but it's getting better. And I think we'll see.
Okay, so you brought up two issues there. So on the issue of working with the Republicans, after speeches like New Hampshire, where he said they all want the right things, we just disagree on how to get there, I almost didn't vote for him. I supported him over Hillary Clinton in the 2008 primaries.
That was a big divide between people who supported Obama and Hillary.
Yeah.
Because Hillary went out there and said, this is false hope. Like, you're not going to get to Washington and get Republicans to work with you.
Well, she was absolutely right about that. She was wrong about most other things, but she was absolutely right about that. And you're telling me he genuinely believed it. It appeared he genuinely believed it. I can't believe he believed it, right? How did he, I think that it's almost arrogance, to be honest. Because having seen the obstinance of the Republicans the last several decades, to think that you could convince them and that they were true patriots and actually believed in what they think rather than getting paid to think that, it seems arrogant, doesn't it?
Look, campaigns are aspirational things. And if your aspiration is to have a presidency and a time in office where you can work to bring people together for a common cause and actually move the country forward, that's a great aspiration. And we ought to have politicians who aspire to that. Now, if the president had said that and got to office and then did nothing, then failure. But he didn't. He got to office and got a ton done. And those first 2 years of his first term are tremendous in the amount of stuff that he got done.
No. Okay, so let's...
No. It's incontrovertible that the president did massive things that other people otherwise have not done in history.
Okay, so let me disagree with a lot of that. So he wasted an enormous amount of time reaching out to Republicans, which never had any prayer, and we were right about that, and he was wrong. Okay, now you say that as well, right? Reaching out to Republicans was a complete and utter waste of time.
No, I don't think it was a waste of time. I think that you have to try everything, right?
I think you have to work at it. Guys, I'll give you a week, okay? All right, now I thought so. You guys are obstinate. I'm moving on because I'm wasting time because he had supermajorities. It was the only time we ever had a supermajority. That was the time to act, for example, on getting money out of politics, but on many other things. So choosing healthcare was perfectly understandable. But with President Obama, everything is a half step, right? Everything is, no, we can't get full change. I'll try for a little bit of change. So you know that his plan, you said it during the elections, the super PAC did at least, that his plan was Mitt Romney's plan. But that's not a thing to brag about, right? So the best thing he did was what they call Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. And it was at best a half measure. It was a former plan, not only of Mitt Romney's, but the Heritage Foundation. So we're bragging like, hey, we got a former right-wing plan through as our big accomplishment.
Tell that to the millions of people who have health insurance now who didn't have it before.
Okay,
it was not a half measure for them. It's not a half measure to fundamentally change the way health care is provided in this country. Did it do everything that every progressive wants? No. Did it do everything that even President Obama wants? President Obama's view is, yes, single payer is probably the best, but that's not where America is. That's not even where Democratic Congress was.
So look, a debate about that will take a long time. I'll just say one quick thing. I agree with you on more people being covered, and that's wonderful. And that's why I've never been against it. I've always said, hey, why didn't we go for the full thing? We had a supermajority, and then we compromised after the initial compromise, and then we got a quarter of the package, if you ask me, and now prices are going up because we never checked the insurance companies. But that's a fair debate, and I know the upsides of it, right? But the idea is what was resonated throughout his administration, unfortunately, reverberated throughout his administration, which is, let me start with a Heritage Foundation proposal, let me start with Mitt Romney's proposal, and then work my way down, right? So initially I said I think he was more right-wing than left-wing, and you said, oh, that's crazy, right? Okay, but that's literally a right-wing position he started with, and then watered down. And on the tax cuts, oh my God, he got some tax increases. He made 94% of Bush's tax cuts permanent, which Bush couldn't do. The banks continued to get every kind of bailout, no prosecution whatsoever, and then quantitative easing on trillions of dollars till the cows come home. I mean, and then we're still bombing in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I can go on almost, not every issue, that's not fair, but on, I would say, 60 to 80% of issues where I would say, I know that was a Republican position. And so it's not a thing to brag about.
You had me at quantitative easing. Well, here,
but that is, it's super important.
Look, I think that if the president is pointing out that there are some places where the things that he wants to get done rhyme with some Republican paper or some Republican idea, that's not a bad thing. It's good to show that, like, not just Democrats want to get something done. This is something that's broader than that. When even Newt Gingrich has an idea on health care, that doesn't mean that we should just throw it out because it's Newt Gingrich's idea. If it's a good idea, we should use it. And that has been the president's view. It's not just, oh, it's Republican, it's stupid. And I don't think that you can look at these first 2 years and say, oh, it was just, he didn't really do that much. No president has been able to do as much as he did in 2 years as he did in those first 2 years. It hasn't been a president who's done it. You can argue FDR over the course of his 9 or 10 terms in office, but on the auto bailout, on the stimulus, turning the economy around, it wasn't just that he got those things done, the economy actually turned around. On saving the auto industry, on ending the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I know you don't like the way that he did it, but he did it in a way that no other president was able to.
But I'm arguing
also, there was H1N1, there were pirates. I mean, there was all sorts of stuff happening in that first term.
I agree with you on the pirates. There were pirates. You're saying, but he did end the war. So I'm saying he didn't end the war. So we're still bombing there. Okay, but I don't want to retread that topic.
Hundreds of thousands of troops have come home.
Right. We can argue about how to do the auto bailouts, but I'll give it to you. I'm happy with the auto bailouts. But again, with the stimulus package, the idea was, let's not go for it all. Let's compromise and then compromise again.
Can I just say something on stimulus?
And
because this is a place where I actually disagreed with the president in the White House.
Okay.
I actually thought that, trying to keep the number, I think it ended up being $770 billion. Mm-hmm. That actually, I would say, was a mistake. Okay. Because the idea was to keep it low so that Democrats wouldn't get attacked for $1 billion or $1 trillion stimulus package.
Right, that's right.
And what ended up happening was they got attacked for a $1.4 trillion stimulus package because Karl Rove did his own math, and that's what Democrats were being attacked for. And I think that actually held up the economy more than it should have because we gave up things that we should not have given up.
So I thank you for being honest about, your authentic opinion on that. It's really, really appreciated. And so, and that's exactly what was driving me crazy, Bill, which is they're gonna attack you anyway. It's Fox News, it's Karl Rove, it's the Republicans. You're Obama, they despise you. Yeah. And if they're gonna call you a socialist, Maoist, communist, you might as well actually have a real progressive position instead of starting with a Newt Gingrich position. And don't get me wrong, can Newt Gingrich be right about a thing or two? Of course. Do I dismiss all Republican ideas out of hand? No. There are some things that the Republicans can be right about. For example, Export-Import Bank, the Republicans are right on. Okay?
That's interesting.
So now, but that doesn't mean
I'm nodding my head, but I don't agree.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. But that doesn't mean that we consistently start with their position, because then that means you are not going to get a progressive position. And I think the president didn't understand that or didn't care enough because he's really not a progressive. He just wanted to get some things done for his legacy and call it, historic reform. I mean, that financial reform.
That's hilarious.
No,
come on.
You think he doesn't care about his legacy? You don't think he doesn't?
It's so silly to say that he doesn't care about his legacy. One of the most impactful presidents of the last century, and he's just doing a couple things for his legacy.
No. Look, Bill. If you say, hey,
the economy was collapsing. And he did massive things to turn it around. That wasn't just for his legacy.
So let's, real quick, address all those things. So if you say to me, hey, Cenk, it's not fair that once he gets something done, you just say, oh, he just did it for his legacy. I hear you on that. That's a fair criticism, right? What I'm saying, but I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it is a concern about appearances because of what people will say about his legacy, okay? So I'm not going to go for real financial reform. I'm going to nick it around the edges and call it historic financial reform so that people can say, oh, what a great legacy. Great job on the legacy. Okay, so that's the criticism. So let's be more specific about it.
Okay, I fundamentally disagree.
Yeah, you think financial reform was legitimate? You think that it's worked? You think that the banks are under control? They're not taking any crazy risks with derivatives?
I think that if the president were the king and not the president, he would have done things a little bit differently.
If the president
but he's
was a
not,
progressive, he
but
would have
he's
done
not.
things differently. Okay, if instead of saying, hey, I can't get real financial reform, I didn't mean it about the placards with the change on it, I'll start with a rough Republican position and water it down. You see, it's not a matter of being a king. It's a matter of, hey, Bill, if you say to me...
I can't wait till you're on stage with Ann Coulter saying the president's not progressive. I mean, I am coming back for that because that is actually going to be awesome for you to say, no, actually the president's been Republican this whole time. No, I mean, the reform is fundamental. And again, something that no one else was able to do for the last, 20, 30 years to get that kind of fundamental reform. And no, banks aren't doing the same things that they used to do. Are they still taking risks that they shouldn't take? I think you can argue that, but are they able to do it with subprime mortgages the way that they were doing it before? No. I think that there are protections in place that are going to stop banks from shutting down the economy the same way that they were able to the last time.
How much you want to bet? The problem
Can I just declare bankruptcy and not pay you?
Well, that's almost exactly what will happen. I hope it doesn't happen to you, but there will be.
Diversify your investments.
There will be another global banking crash because they are still taking the same risk with derivatives, whether it's on different, properties. That's okay. Hey, the housing scam, we can't quite reconstitute that. We'll just do it in another category, and it's derivatives either way. It's massive gambling either way, and I'm gambling with the depositor's money. So what difference does it make? I'm not going to pay the bill.
There is massive gambling. I actually think that the thing that this isn't necessarily directly relevant, but I think the thing that will mitigate some of the next crash, because I think that crashes are somewhat inevitable given the cyclical nature of economies, but whatever the next crash is that now these VC funds are so big and private equity is so big that the risk is really owned by a handful of rich people around the world as opposed to all just in the stock market. So I think that's going to mitigate some of whatever happens next when we see an economic downturn, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I'm worried that instead of mitigating it, it's going to inflame it. Because,
why is that?
Because once the dominoes start falling, they will also fall for those guys. And then
I think it starts with those guys.
Right. I mean, if it would be surprising if it didn't start with private equity or the giant banks, one of those two areas. So, but then again, we get to the position where, well, if we thought there was fundamental reform and we'd fix it, had a Glass-Steagall, or they couldn't use depositor money to do the gambling, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So obviously the reform, not quite enough, at least.
I don't think that you can reform for every possible problem that comes to pass, right? Like you said, campaign finance reform is a big reason for that. But even so, Congress is made up of imperfect individuals who can't plan for every single thing that's going to happen. So I don't think that means that the reform was pointless or useless. I think it just means, there are humans who made that legislation and can't plan for every single thing that's going to happen.
Bribed humans.
I'm with you that it's a I'm with you that is a massive problem, and I don't know that it's the number one problem. I look at poverty and I see that as the number one problem that our country faces, but it's up there. It's a top issue that America needs to contend with.
So last thing on the policy issues, then I want to ask you about 2016, and then we'll wrap it up. When you talk about poverty, income inequality, obviously it's a huge issue. It's an issue in 2016. It's an issue for the president. There's conversation about how not enough was done for the African American community. Now, it's not that, hey, we need to specifically be like, okay, this is what we're doing for African Americans. But if we helped alleviate income inequality, that would have helped African Americans who are disproportionately affected by it, and Latinos and many other Americans. And so, for example, the economic recovery that you say the Obama administration did right. I agree with you, stock market went back up. I agree with you, the job numbers are much better than they used to be, and he doesn't get enough credit for the job numbers. I agree with you on that. Now, on the other hand, in 2010 as an example, 93% of the recovery went to the top 1%. So then I look at that and I go, well, that's exactly what the establishment would have wanted, and that's what Obama gave them. So, massive problem.
Look, and I also said that not everybody is feeling the recovery when I was talking about those things. And even if you look at Santa Barbara County, where I live, you hear Santa Barbara, you're like, oh, nice, fancy, awesome place. More than half of the kids who live in my county qualify for free reduced lunch. Even in a place where you would assume that that's not the case. And that's what it is all over the country. We've got millions of Americans who live on the streets, in large part because we don't address our mental illness system in our country. And I think that it's when I quit the White House, I had some time with the president. It's what I talked to him about. It was It's something that I wanted to spend some time on. It's something that I wanted to help from the outside. The White House think of some ideas on what to do there, and I'm with you. I think that but it's not just poor folks, right? Like the wage stagnation is, all across the middle class because, energy costs are going up, healthcare costs are going up, education costs are going up, but wages are staying the same, so everybody feels like they're actually losing money. So, yeah, no, I agree. I think that that's something that is a massive problem in this country, and I think that that's the inheritance of the next president. And I hope that they figure out a way to deal with it. I think it starts with the minimum wage, and that'll help raise boats for everybody.
So on that front, the last two questions is about 2016. Do you have a candidate that you prefer? I know you mentioned being supportive of Lessig, but is there someone in the race that you'd rather win?
I'm a Hillary guy. I'm with Hillary.
Mm-hmm. So overall, Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now
I love her. I'm a donor. I help her raise money.
Oh wow.
I support her. Yeah, I'm all in.
That's strong. Okay. Now you guys ran against her obviously in 2008. So what's changed between 2008 and now that makes you go from not supporting her to enthusiastically supporting her?
Well, if Barack Obama could run for a third term, I'd still be with him. So the Constitution prohibits me from supporting him for president. But that's the biggest thing. I mean, even in 2007, 2008, I thought that Hillary Clinton would be a great president. It's just that I thought that the moment was right for Barack Obama. And I met him. I love the guy. I wanted to work for him. I thought that, and you know what? When I went to go work for him, I was just laughing with some of my buddies from the Obama campaign recently. There was probably, for the first 6 months of that campaign, there was one person on the campaign who thought that we were going to win. It was Barack Obama, right? Mm-hmm. And the rest of us were like, no, it'd be a really good idea if he did. But no, I think that Hillary Clinton is, I think that she's a great, strong leader who's much more aligned with you in terms of like, you get to Washington, you understand the fact that Republicans aren't going to work for you, and so you crack some heads and you get some things done and you work as hard as you can to make the progress that America needs to make. So I think she's been a great Secretary of State. I think she's a great senator, and I think that she's going to be a great president.
So that's one of a couple of issues I agree with her on. But that leads perfectly into the last question. So if Hillary Clinton is elected president, or any of the Republicans, of course, do you really think that we're going to have any kind of fundamental change, or are we going to just keep going on the same road? And the income inequality is going to continue to be either the same or worse. We're not going to fix campaign finance reform. We're not going to be able to take any real action on climate change. Because right now, as things stand, we can't do any of those things. And if we keep going along the lines of we have been, and Hillary Clinton, you have to confess, is as establishment gets, what hope do we have for real change?
I encourage folks who are watching or listening to look at an interview the president did with David Remnick, New Yorker magazine, where he says that the presidency is sort of like a relay race in a river, right? Or like a long book, and you're just trying to get your paragraph right. I think America is built in such a way that you can't wave a magic wand and do fundamental change on any number of things. And even though we need fundamental change in a lot of things, and even though it's unconscionable that people sleep on the streets in the richest country in the history of the world, we need to make huge changes. America's not built like that, right? I think that if you make change as big as you possibly can, and I think that even if you probably asked Hillary Clinton upon the election of Barack Obama, do you think that he would be able to bring about the kind of changes that he did? I don't know that she would have agreed, right? But he put his head down and worked with the Democratic Congress and got a lot of things done. And even since then, not working with a Congress that agrees with him on most things, he's been able to do a lot. So I think that we will see some kind of change. I can tell you what, if we see a Republican presidency, we'll see a lot of change. We'll see the unraveling of all the things that President Obama did. And, I think there's gradations of it, right? Like if we have a President Ted Cruz, like it's going to be, the implications for healthcare are going to be tremendous. But even Jeb Bush, who's probably the most moderate of the bunch, or John Kasich, are going to do a lot of work to unravel all the advances that President Obama made. So can we wave a wand and do all the things that us progressives want to do? No. But I think that if we do elect Hillary Clinton or a Democratic president, we are going to be able to do a lot.
I think that you've accurately summarized the state of play. If the Republicans win, there will be negative change and things will get worse. If Hillary Clinton wins, we'll have more of the same. And I think to a lot of our audience, that is deeply depressing.
It shouldn't be. I think that keep moving forward and continuing to bend towards a progressive reality is something that people should want, and that she's capable of achieving for the American people. But it's the arc of history is long, right? It's just a matter of which direction you want to bend it towards.
Okay, we've had great, honest agreements and disagreements. Bill Burton, thank you so much for joining on the Young Turks.
It's
Really
great to be on.
appreciate it.
Thank you.